Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host Oyani Onimiya. How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shannon. What up, though? How's your day going so far?
Yeah, you know how my day's going. Yeah, like you don't know. To be honest, though,
he's not in a great mood today because he had a whole program licensing problem at work. You want to talk about that, Shannon? Further?
I mean, honestly, I feel like I'm getting less salty as the time goes by. I'm transitioning from my work mind to my podcast mind. I feel like starting to be a little more happy.
Yeah.
But no, it was just a matter of I had a breakthrough at work, and I used this program to do some of my analysis. It makes things easier, and I got the code working. I got everything working right. I made sure that all the math was spitting out the correct numbers, and there's it's like almost like a playground, because like when you're doing research, you're trying to find an interesting question to ask, and you're trying to then, like, once you find the interesting question, you want to answer it. And so I found an interesting question to ask, and I did some preliminary answering, and I got some interesting results. So then it's like, okay, I don't know what this is. I don't actually know what I'm looking at. So to find that out, you do some extra analysis, and then you start connecting all the dots. Mm-hmm. And so I was in that process. I was in the process of connecting the dots. And then the license on my effing program stopped working. And this expired. And this particular program, it's not very easy to get this renewed.
License. Apparently it's a convoluted process. So, but I'm glad you're feeling a little better now,
Yeah.
You're getting to talk to me. So, things are better now.
If you want to, it was you. I mean, to be honest, it was partially, I'm not gonna lie.
Oh man. But I think I'm happy that we're meeting again to record a second episode of this. The first episode was interesting, I should say. The process of us getting it out. Yeah. We learned a lot about patience and try again.
Oh yeah, yeah. You guys have no clue what version of that episode you heard. You have no. That was probably like the 5th or 6th time
version. Yeah, and I think it's one of those type growing pains of just making a new key, so to speak. Like we say. So I think we're definitely going to get better at it now.
Well, that's the thing I'm most salty about. But that work thing was now I have to make a brand new key if I want to use something else. Yep. And it's like, all right, I wanted to do my analysis to find out, to answer some of those questions, but now I have to stop and probably spend like 3 or 4 days learning how to use a completely different program. Then I have to recode everything.
Yep. And just making keys is hard. It's just that's the most difficult part of anything. Yeah.
Oh yeah, because you're doing something new, and to be honest, if you are doing something new, you're learning a new language, you're learning a new skill. It's a skill you didn't have before, and so you are building that data in yourself. You're literally rearranging the physical state of the universe, and that's not easy.
Not easy. Yeah, no matter what you're trying to learn, no matter how trivial it might seem, like making keys is hard. I've been learning some new software myself this past week, and what day? I think we spoke on. Was it Monday or Sunday? We spoke. I think it was Sunday.
Probably
Sunday, yeah. And you were like, "Man, why do you sound so down?" And I was like, "Yeah, you have no idea, man." I was.
Oh, we talked about that was Saturday.
Yeah, I was hitting my head on the wall trying to get this thing working, man. And so I get it, but I think
when we say keys, we mean conceptual keys. Man.
Yes, not actual blacksmithing or anything like that.
Well, what's the difference, really?
I mean, that is making a key, literally. But, yeah, and I'm happy that we got the episode out. I'm happy that we got the reception we got. Thanks, guys, for all the support.
We appreciate it. Really for everyone who listened and shared, like, and we really appreciate your support.
We got
for
and
sure.
Stuff. Yeah, it was great. A couple of my friends from my other job hit me up. They want to meet you. They're like, "Yeah, man, we gotta meet Shannon. We gotta hang out with him." And then I told you I got a couple of 2 girls actually like, "Oh, is Dr. Ray single?" Or whatever. It's like,
no, I'm not. Leave me alone. No,
yeah, but I like it. I like the reception we got. It was great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to meet your ex-workmates.
Oh yeah.
If it weren't for the COVIDs.
Yeah.
If it weren't for the COVID, I ain't trying to catch nothing from.
Yeah.
But so in this,
Yeah.
the last episode, we brought up a conceptual tool, and that's a conceptual key that hopefully you guys have been ruminating on, and that is the degree of freedom soup. And that's going to be a consistent theme throughout the podcast, where it is just a really useful conceptual tool for trying to, the way I see it is it's supposed to break the illusion that people have that what they see is reality. Mm-hmm. And what they're actually seeing is a model of reality as constructed by the human computer or the human configuration. That thing is constructing this model. And hopefully what the degree of freedom soup does, if you take the time to really try to visualize what we proposed, which was this static noise, you can add some color in there, but instead of it being completely static noise, there's some structure, and it's that structure that represents the configuration of the universe. And we're hoping that if you really try in your mind's eye to conceptualize that, you can now start seeing things almost in terms of information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like the picture of the box of crayons. Just picture the box of crayons crushed up in a blender that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the degree of freedom soup. That's how you start to like really conceptualize some of the things that we're talking about. It's not as abstract as you might think, but it's useful for you to start to picture it as, static noise with some color and that has some flexibility to move around, and you're just navigating through that soup of it.
Yeah. And I think that when we're talking about the flexibility, like instead of just looking at it instead of the crayons and the static noise, to make it a more clear picture as to why it's something of why it's a conceptual tool for thinking in terms of information, is just think of it as a grid. Like think of graph paper. Like if anyone uses graph paper, you can Google what graph paper looks like, where it's just a bunch of squares. And instead of imagining static noise, instead imagine that you have some high resolution graph paper, and you can just make each little box black, or you can make it white. And then think about the combination of all the different ways that you can make
different things out of that.
Different ways, black and white, like all the different combinations.
Yep.
And you can imagine like that as being your degree of freedom soup. And then instead of it being black or white, we can add some more structure in there for color, for some more dynamics, for some more degrees of freedom on how you can create the structure. But in your mind's eye, you should be imagining just kind of like this binary grid of black and white, and the universe is constantly evolving from different configurations of black and white. Yeah. And that is the conceptual tool that the degree of freedom soup is supposed to have, because then that's looking at the universe without the filter of a mind going through and then rendering this version of reality that you see.
For us. Yep. Yeah. I definitely agree. And I think we're talking earlier about, a lot of the conversations around, are we in a simulation or are we not in a simulation? And it seems like it's a very common, I don't want to say dinner table conversation, but because
cocktail party.
Yeah,
cocktail party. I like to call this type of stuff like cocktail party knowledge. Where someone
I think
comes by.
that's kind of what it is. And definitely we're not saying that, this is pointless. There's some fun to be had in doing it, I guess.
Speak for yourself.
Come on now. You can't say that it's completely pointless to talk about it. It's nice as a conversational piece, but as far as, something concrete, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's useful. I think it's useful to the extent that you're trying to imagine the boundaries of knowledge, or the boundaries of what you can know. And so it's the same thing. It's the same question as, are we brains in a vat? Are we in the Matrix? Are we in some computer simulation that some other civilization constructed? Are we just playing Roy from Rick and Morty? If you ever seen Rick and Morty and you play Roy, I think the sequel was Dave, and Morty goes to this arcade in space, and he's playing, and he hooks himself up to this machine, and he plays this entire life of some dude named Roy. And, the dude lives until he's like 80 and then was working at he gets married and he gets divorced or something. I don't remember. Any Rick and Morty fans going to lambaste me for not knowing the exact details. But, and then he ends up dying. And when he dies, he wakes up and Morty can't remember if he's Roy or if he's Morty, which part is reality. Like, you could spend an infinite amount of time thinking about all the scenarios, speculating about which one we're in. But what the real power of the thought experiment of are we in a simulation is the fact that we don't know, we don't have information beyond where we currently are. And so what it's telling you is the boundary of your knowledge. And that actually has some strong implications. Like the implications of that boundary isn't spending your time forever speculating about the set of all possibilities of what we could be in. But what that does tell you is focus on what it says about what we do know. What we do know about our reality. And that's kind of what we want to focus on in this episode.
I definitely see. I think questions about are we in a simulation or not have probably been in my mind for years now.
Since the Matrix, since Keanu came into your life?
Since Keanu came into my life. Shout out to Keanu, by the way.
Big Keanu Reeves fan over here.
Yeah, and anyone who knows me knows that I really do like Keanu Reeves, so, you're going to hear a lot of that in this podcast. But the Matrix specifically, though, was, how we talk about, like, those memory mapping points? That's what I call them. Those things that happen in your life that you kind of are able to, like, map as a memory point for ego. Was this before the Matrix or was this after the Matrix? I have a whole life when I never watched the Matrix and then when I watched the Matrix and then on. And I think
the demarcation before and after, and then you can use that single point.
Matrix is a point. In my map. And I think it's interesting because when I first saw it, probably maybe 2000 was the first time I saw it, I didn't quite get if there was anything deeper. Now that I'm older, I really do think that there's a lot of depth to it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Significant. Yeah. But, I love the fight choreography. I love the, effects and whatnot. And that was great. But over time, you really start to question, are we actually in a simulation? I really did give this some thought. And I think I said this to you earlier, one of the most interesting people who has one of, I guess, the most popular ideas about this is this dude named Nick Bostrom. Bostrom, I think. He's a Swedish philosopher. He does like AI ethics and all that kind of stuff. AI ethics, body modification ethics. He's always writing papers about that. But so he basically came up with 3 options. I don't know if you've heard this before. The first option
I have not. Lay it on me, bro.
Oh, yeah. So the first option is it's either whatever advanced civilization is existing or in existence, it's either they go extinct or somehow destroy themselves before they reach peak technological capabilities to make ancestor simulations, which is exactly what we are. If you say we're in a simulation, we're ancestor simulations. That's essentially what it means. So almost like you're playing Assassin's Creed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, it's either this civilization, this, super advanced species, before they got to where they could create high fidelity Assassin's Creed of our lives as ancestor programs, they wipe themselves out. That's his first option. The second option is they have achieved this and they just have no interest in running ancestor programs. The third option is
wait. They have no interest in
running ancestor.
What's the implications
programs.
of that?
Huh?
What's the implication of that? Like they create the simulation and then they don't
do it. So again, his arguments was it's either these are the 3 options. So in that case, we are definitely not simulations.
Oh, okay.
Definitely not. Or the first option is, maybe they wiped themselves out before they did. The last idea he has is it could be that we are actually in a simulation. And then that's where people extrapolated it from to say, if we're in a simulation, that means other civilizations have created more and more simulations. So the probability of us being in a simulation then increases exponentially. Because the same way there's 1,000,001 video games. If that's the case, then we are more likely in a simulation than we're not.
Yes,
but
and this is yeah. Right.
It is speculation on speculation on speculation that just never ends.
Yes. And for so for me, the power of this tool, of this conceptual tool of realizing, like, the thing that's really great about modern society is that the idea of a computer is common. The idea of virtual reality is common. Yeah. And as technology gets more advanced, the ideas of a high fidelity virtual reality is common. And so that means a high fidelity virtual reality is like I hook myself up to a machine and I start getting these information updates, I start getting information updates from this machine that are indistinguishable than if I weren't hooked up to the machine and I was just walking around in what we call reality. Or whatever. Yeah. And so that makes it really, so what that does is it brings to the forefront of people's minds that where everyone's like, oh, okay, we have now reached a point in our understanding of reality that we know that this is possible. And now that we know it's possible, we can't discount that we aren't in that situation. Yes. And it's interesting because if you go back thousands of years, they didn't have the idea of a computer. They couldn't conceptualize with a computer. And if at any point in time they did develop an idea of a computer, it wouldn't be the same version of a computer that we all have access to now in modern day. And so it really makes it to where everyone has access to this idea that we could be in a simulation, which really does put it into the perspective that, oh, we really can't rule that out. But what that does is, because we don't actually have access or a means to distinguish whether we're in a simulation or not, all that really does is give us the boundary of our knowledge. And beyond that boundary, we're just in a space where there's all these symmetric ideas. That's why there's an infinite number of possibilities, whether we're brains in a vat or we're in the matrix. We can't rule any of them out. Yep. And so the power of that tool to me is it tells us that the physical that we usually treat as being reality. So like you pick up your phone, like you were saying in the last episode, you pick up your phone, you pick up a rock or something like that and you're looking at it and you treat that physical as being reality. But because we all have access to the idea that this could be a virtual reality, this stuff has to get downgraded. Yeah. Because that uncertainty that we have about whether or not we're in a simulation forces us to now question what this stuff is. And all we know about this stuff, and if anyone, no one can see, but I'm holding an eraser up to Oyani as he's nodding agreeably. But all we can say about this stuff is that it is some stuff that updates information stored that seems to follow a consistent set of rules. We actually don't know what the fuck it is. Yeah. We don't know what it is.
Yeah, and I think that just being able to really start to conceptualize, like you said, a graph in paper, and just understand that, what reality is essentially we're just in this space where the configuration is constantly changing and we're changing. I think you had a pretty interesting explanation about a man who's in a box.
No, we can do that.
Oh yeah. Let's go. Do it.
You want to do it?
No, you do.
Okay. So the thing that Oyani is talking about is a thought experiment to try to say, okay, if we're in a simulation, let's make a clear question that we have to answer to determine whether or not we're in a simulation. And so to do that, we use the degree of freedom soup again. And so, like I said at the beginning of the episode, imagine whatever conceptualization you've used to now imagine a degree of freedom soup.
I like the graph paper one. Let's do that.
Yeah.
So that's just what everything looks like.
Yeah. Just imagine that's what it looks like if there's no minds to actually filter it. And so imagine that as you're somehow you stepped out of your own skin and now you're looking at the universe not within your shell. You're no longer a ghost in a shell. You've been released, and you're looking from outside your shell. And imagine that this degree of freedom soup goes on to infinity. And then imagine that you make that you can, in your mind's eye, you make a drawing of a human shape. Whatever level of fidelity you need for it to human shape. It could be like not a stick figure. It needs some actual like
space inside
area.
So like a silhouette of a human.
A silhouette. Yeah, it's a silhouette of a human. Yeah. And so now what you have is the degree of freedom soup inside the silhouette, and you have the degree of freedom soup outside of the silhouette. And so as that human being is moving through the degree of freedom soup, the degree of freedom soup inside of it's going to be changing. The degree of freedom soup outside of it's going to be changing. So now, instead of the degree of freedom soup going on for infinity, I mean, it still is going on for infinity. Now draw a box around the human. And that box is going to represent the computer. That's the computer simulation that human's stuck in. Yeah. So now let's imagine that this advanced society created this box that this human silhouette thing is now stuck in, and that human can only move within that box. But the scenario that it find itself in is that within that box there is still a degree of freedom soup, and that degree of freedom soup is changing as the human moves through the degree of freedom soup, and so essentially nothing has changed. The scenario has not changed. And what the question is, whether or not in a simulation, the real question you have to answer is, can you tell the difference from if the box was there or if you got rid of the box?
Yeah. Because the processes and your interaction with the degree of freedom soup is pretty much the same. It's just bound by the amount of information you have access to.
Yeah.
That's what the bounds is.
Yeah. And the thing about that box, this whole box scenario is so let's imagine that there is a scenario in which some advanced technology or some advanced civilization has created a computer, and then within that has simulated themselves or a version of themselves, or have created some sort of intelligent beings or some sort of conscious beings. If they themselves were conscious beings, and we know that within our own reality that there are things that are conscious, there are configurations that are conscious, and there are configurations that are not conscious. And so that means that the structure of consciousness is an actual configuration of the universe. And so if they're able to extract that configuration, they've gotten advanced enough to where they can either analyze themselves, identify the structure that is consciousness, and then extract that information and then imbue it into their computer, then they've extracted consciousness, and that configuration is independent of the physical matter that's been placed in it. And that's kind of where we're headed to ourselves, because we're creating this artificial intelligence, but really what we're trying to produce is artificial consciousness. Yeah. But if we have successfully extracted the data of what consciousness is and imbued it into this inanimate matter,
it's no more artificial.
It's not artificial. It's just consciousness.
It's actually consciousness now.
And so again, the reason why I don't want to waste my time asking, are we in a simulation, is because if someone has simulated consciousness and then put it in this computer and then they've gone off and they've effed off somewhere or died or whatever it is, it's like, well, that's just regular life. Yeah. We're still conscious beings moving through a degree of freedom soup. Not only that, but the matter they had to use to create that was the matter in their universe. It was the matter in their universe. And so it's like no matter at any step of creating a simulation, you're still going to be using matter that, whether the box is there
or the box is not there, you're still stuck in that soup. There.
Yeah, you're still using matter. You're still rearranging matter. It's all the process. You're just rearranging matter, and no matter what level you are, whether or not you are the person creating the simulation, or
from
you're the
outside,
person,
or you're the last one on the inside, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter,
because at the end of the day, you are just navigating that space, and the process doesn't change regardless of how many rings you go down.
Yeah, no matter how.
It's information all the way down. Yeah.
Yeah. If for example, if we created artificial intelligence or artificial consciousness, which we're really close to doing if we haven't already, then again, we just rearrange the matter and we put it in this computer box thing, and now it's just navigating its space and it's doing its analysis. It's just no different than what we're doing. And so why waste our time trying to, unless we can answer the question, is there a difference if that box is there or not? If we can do an experiment to answer that question, it's like, okay, good. But if we don't have any experiment to answer that question, then let's please not waste our time.
I'm thinking about it now, and I'm wondering to myself, though, why are we so fascinated with that question anyway? I'm trying to think, what is the history behind why it seems to be an interesting thing that we worry about? Because even on a base level, now that I think about it, there is still consequence.
Yeah.
And just for the mere fact that there is still consequence, it's as real as it gets.
Exactly.
It's as real as it actually gets. Like I don't know what to tell you guys.
There's still consequence.
Yeah, there is still consequence, and that was how I kind of ratified my thoughts years ago. This was way before we even met. When I started to think about it, it's like, you know what? There's still consequence. You could play all you want, like we're in a simulation, we're not. You don't want to be locked up in jail, for example.
Yeah,
Exactly. You can actually feel the consequence of that. You're not going to have your freedom anymore. Like, that alone is enough to say, what is really the point? What does it matter? What really changes if we know it is or if we know it's not? Now, I read something where someone said, well, like in a video game, we have main characters and we have NPCs. Don't you want to know if you're an NPC or if you're a main character? It's like, that's the extent. And you know what an NPC is one of those non-playable characters who just give you information in the game. And the people, I guess the best explanation I could get for people who want to know if it is or if it's not is what place they are, where they fit in.
Well, you could probably answer that question.
That's as deep as, I can figure out why anybody would want to know that badly, why it would be a controversy if it's real or not.
Well, I think it's just a want to know, like, we want to know truth. We want to know what things really are, and we're always trying to push the boundary of what we know. And I think there's just that general curiosity that humans have to try to figure out what the answer is to things. But another reason why I don't want to waste my time is because to the question, are we in a simulation? The answer is yes.
Yes.
Obviously, yes. And the simulation that we're in the simulation that's created by our physical bodies of the degree of freedom soup,
and how we filter it based off of the information we have access to.
Yeah, and so I want to introduce some new terms that people might be useful for people to use, and that is the difference between hard reality and soft reality. And so let's say that the hard reality is the configuration of the universe that exists independent of any minds that are there to observe it. So we assume that the Big Bang model of the universe, that as the universe evolved, when it initially started to evolve, there was a state of the universe before there were minds, and then eventually the structure of mind came into existence, and there's a state of the universe in which minds exist. And all that time before any mind exists, the universe still has to be in some configuration because it had to develop to the point where minds could exist. So let's call that part hard reality. But like we were saying in the last episode, as beings of mind, we're constantly stuck in our models. And our models actually determine everything about our reality. We don't have access to anything beyond the information stored within our model. So that's soft reality. But that's the reality we actually live in. We as beings of mind actually live in soft reality. And so we are these minds, like the simulation we're in, the soft reality is a simulation of hard reality. And we know for a fact that we are in that simulation because, like we were saying before, with the degree of freedom soup, like, we don't know what an octopus conceptualizes. We don't know what a bear conceptualizes. They all have their different simulations of what hard reality is. And so the answer to the question, are we in a simulation? Yes. Like, we have high confidence to think that we are in a simulation given this perception of being trapped in our models of reality. And so let's focus on what we do know. And like I was saying before, because we all have the familiarity with a high fidelity virtual reality and we're so close to producing one, we have to downgrade the physical as being like the end all be all of reality and upgrade the model. And that model is the conceptual space, because even as a physicist, when we look at something like momentum, momentum is an aspect of hard reality that exists regardless if there's any human to observe it.
Observe it or not.
But it's still, for us to interact with it and understand it, we still have to filter it through a concept. We have the concept of momentum that we've constructed that is a model of something that exists independent of us. And so because of that, because momentum itself is a concept, you start to realize that all the more precise physical definitions that we have for, in physics and stuff like that, when we define reality, those are all just concepts. And so we're trapped in this space of concepts. And so the space of concepts now has to be elevated because we know that we don't know what this physical stuff is. It could be a simulation. We don't actually know. We just know it follows a consistent set of rules.
It makes absolute
sense. And that is the power of this concept. That is the power of the question, are we in a simulation? It's the power to know that we don't actually know what this physical stuff is. And therefore we can't treat it as the end all be all.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I agree, because I think it's useful to just understand that we are in essence just interpreting, hard reality in a way that it's I don't want to say in a way that it's pleasurable for us to understand, or we're just trying to make sense of it. So we're going through this degree of freedom soup, and we're just trying to make sense of those little squares. Okay, if we turn 3 blacks here, 1 white's here, we get this. If we turn 2 blacks here, 3 whites here, we get this. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. So if the question, are we in a simulation? Yeah, we very, very likely are. But again, we're simulating all this stuff, guys.
Yeah. Well, for me, using the definitions or the language that we've constructed, I would say the answer is definitively yes. But the thing is I can't assume that everyone agrees with my definition. Yeah. So
I think for me, I'm on the fence. Like, you know what? It's very likely that we are in a simulation until I get more information. Otherwise, I think that I'll stick with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple other aspects. So one of the things I kind of want to focus on is, all right, now that we know that we're stuck in this soft reality, or we're stuck in this model, or we're stuck in this simulation, actually, before I move on to that, there was something that
I have a quick question. What's up? When you say soft reality, I guess I'm trying to really latch onto that in my head, and I'm thinking, soft reality, is it soft reality because it's malleable?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's I think that's what I want people to start to get. Like, when we say soft reality, it just means the stuff that we can mold and create into other stuff and reconfigure a different way or whatever. Yeah.
Well, so for me, when we say whenever we're talking about moving from one reality to the next, like last episode when you were talking about, you got that new information about who built the cages, and then all of a sudden you were reinterpreting everything, your model had changed, you were in a new reality now, where you had this new information which was different than your previous reality. Yep. So from now on, when we're talking this podcast, when we say reality, we are talking about soft reality, because that is the space we're stuck in. It is the extent, like I was saying before, it's the extent to what we can know anything about hard reality. So whenever and to your point about it being malleable, is the model that we get, a large portion of the work is done for us by the fact that we're human. So the human configuration, using physics and math terms, they're the things that determine the lowest order terms. So whenever you're doing an approximation of something, like if you're looking at a Fourier series or something like that, like when my graduate work, I was trying to optimize this quasi-local energy functional. And so I used a Fourier series to do so. And to optimize the functional, Fourier series are just vectors, basically. And so what I would do is I would optimize the functional using one Fourier coefficient at first. And so that first Fourier coefficient, that's like the lower order terms.
Okay.
And then after I'd get that first one, I would add an extra coefficient, and then I'd optimize in the space of 2 coefficients. So now I'm optimizing in a 2-dimensional space. And that second coefficient is smaller than the first coefficient. So then I go and so those first 2, that's an approximation of the answer to the functional I'm trying to optimize. So then I get a third coefficient, and then that makes my answer a little more precise. Then I get a fourth coefficient. It makes my answer a little more precise. And so the first 3 or 4 coefficients, if we're trying to determine our model of reality, that's all done for us by being human. Like the human part takes care of all of that. That stuff's not very malleable. You kind of born, you see what you see. That's how it works. Yeah. But the higher order terms, those are the really malleable bits. And those are the bits that we are trying, especially that we're trying to discover and trying to understand. Like as physicists, as scientists, we are trying to find the highest, those higher order terms that then give us a clear understanding of the model of reality. But, people can make those higher order terms whatever they want. And how good they choose those terms affects the quality of their model. It affects the fidelity of their model. And some people, when they're finding those coefficients, they're not necessarily trying to optimize towards fidelity to hard reality. They're trying to optimize towards how it makes them feel. Or something like that.
Okay.
And so that's where we're then in this question, like we're trying to create a consensus on what reality is. We're arguing over those higher order terms. And that's the malleability that you were talking about.
Yeah, because I think that that kind of leads into the whole idea of how consensus plays a huge role in, plays a huge role in what reality actually is, and how we, navigate this space and store, access information, and update information.
Exactly.
I was telling you about a video I had seen about this guy. He had some condition with his eyes where he couldn't see like a whole bunch of colors.
Oh yeah.
And then his family got him like a pair of glasses, and you could physically.
You never sent that to me, by the way.
Yeah, I should send that video to you. Yeah, you love it. And you could physically almost physically see his mind being reconfigured. Like I was watching it and I could almost see the boxes turning in his head. Like, oh. And his family just stood by, and it just seemed like they were confirming shit for him, like, oh yeah, that's blue, oh yeah, that's red, yeah.
And the way you said it the first time when you explained it to me, the guy, he could only see a few colors, and he put these glasses on, then he could see a full spectrum he didn't have access to before. You said that it felt like you could see the information
just
flooding
in.
into his face.
Yeah, and he was just there, just absorbing it in, and it's as real as it gets. Like, this is not like some abstract stuff. Like, you can actually really feel or really see yourself in this space and access information in this space and reach it like you're walking through a door and opening a room. Kind of like how we talk about all the time. But again, consensus plays a huge role because,
Absolutely. And that was a perfect segue because the thing is individually we have our own models, but a lot of times we rely on other people's data to confirm our own models. And so we try to build like we were saying before, we need to have a process for how we build consensus so that when we're all trying to determine what those higher order terms are, we can all agree on what they are. And so to kind of put this in perspective, so when thinking about reality, I like to think of it as information stored plus consensus.
Yeah.
And so the consensus part is like, you can kind of think of it in terms of this, let's break down what the phrase "did you see that" is. Did you see that? That was actually one of the first conceptual tools I used to kind of understand how reality depends on information stored plus consensus from other people. Yeah. So one of the things I thought about is, let's take the chupacabra. I don't even know if I said that right. I think it's a chupacabra. Anyway, I think it's like a Mexican
I've heard about. Yeah, it's like
a goat sucking, like it sucks the blood of goats and all. So like this little gremlin.
It's like a mutated creature or whatever. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. So imagine that you're sitting there with a friend and you're just eating, having lunch, and then the chupacabra comes running around on the floor,
and just runs out the door.
And just runs out the door. The first thing you're going to turn to the other people like, did you see that? Yeah. Did you see that thing right there? Because what you're saying is, I just got an information update.
Did you get it?
And did you also get that information update?
That's exactly what it is.
And if that person goes, oh yeah, I also got the information update, then you can start going, all right, now I can start trusting that data as being something reliable, as opposed to, am I just hallucinating? Yeah. And then if you turn on the TV and then you find out like, oh,
there's been multiple sightings of chupacabra
being sighted all over the place. Yeah. Matter of fact, they're like the chupacabras everywhere, and they're just running around, and like all the goats are dead. Then you can start going, all right, I'm getting all this extra confirmation that this is part of, that this is a true aspect of hard reality. And then you start accepting it. And so what we have to realize is when we're trying to build consensus, how do we do that? And this is why the physical gets treated with so much reverence, and why it's treated as the end all be all reality, because it follows a consistent set of rules. If I make a logically sound argument about my model of reality, using the physical stuff, then someone else can look at my argument. They can see whether or not it's logically consistent. So see if there's any contradictions. They're like, all right, this is logically consistent. From it being logically consistent, it should have consequences. So these consequences should be testable hypotheses. And then from the testable hypotheses, someone can do an experiment and then verify whether or not your model or your theory is valid. And because it's a logically sound argument based off this physical stuff that everyone has access to, anyone can verify it. Yeah. And so that verification process is how we make consensus. And so that's why the physical is treated so importantly, because it's how it behaves is independent of any particular mind. And that's how we can build consensus. Whereas if you're trying to build consensus, if you're trying to give someone a model of reality, like your version of reality, and it depends only on faith, for example, then there's no way for someone to independently verify your feelings or what you think. And so it's really difficult to build a bridge between your reality and their reality when they use something like faith.
And that's where, it's really useful, because the first time we talked about the idea of, did you see that? That first time we talked about that phrase, it took me a minute to kind of get it. But yeah, that phrase is really important, because if you see a red sports car go by or whatever on a dark, dusty road where nobody drives that kind of a car, and you say, oh yeah, did you see that? If your buddy says, oh no, I didn't see that. Okay. Yeah. You place it somewhere in your mind and you're like, okay, that's a little odd.
I'm uncertain about this. Yeah.
And then you see another car again. And like, did you see that? No. Okay. Now that bridge is starting to break apart, because the bridge between your reality and this person's reality now is completely different. And you guys are in the same space, so to speak. So I don't know.
Well, at the very least, if that happened to me, I would start questioning the usefulness. I'd start questioning whether or not either that person is insane or I'm insane.
Yeah. So
something's going wrong.
The bridge is no longer there. The bridge is breaking apart now, because you can't connect. Did you see that with not? So either that person's not seeing what you're seeing, something's wrong with their eyes, something's wrong with their mind,
something's wrong with them.
Something is wrong somewhere.
Something's wrong with you, or something's wrong with them, but we're not building a consensus over here. Yeah.
So the consensus, and that was one of the things I was really excited for us to get into, because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about this stuff, it's easy for you to take it to mean, oh, well, reality is just what you make it to be, or... No, let's calm down, okay? Let's rein it back in a little bit. Consensus plays a huge role in what we agree. Yeah, because sometimes I get a little bit wary about kind of being in this degree of freedom soup. You know how people take freedom.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay.
Freedom.
Okay. Freedom is great, but yeah, consensus still matters. You can't go around and say COVID-19 doesn't exist when there is consensus that, you see what I mean? Like, and that's where the difference is, between reality and the fact that reality is, information stored and consensus.
Yep. Information stored plus consensus. And also I wanted to point out, when you're talking about how you can't just go on a free-for-all about, oh, reality is just what you make it, or it's whatever. It's like, it kind of reminds me of when people start to realize, like, is this all an imagination?
Yeah.
And the answer is, just as the question, is this all a simulation? The answer is yes. Is this all an imagination? Yes. The answer is yes. But it's an imagination and a simulation of hard reality.
So what are you going to do now?
It's a simulation and an imagination of something that is independent of yourself. And, other creatures, like I like to say, we all see the cliff. Yeah. No one's running off the cliff. And even if this all was all imagination, if someone comes and stabs you, it still hurts. Like, there's still consequences.
Exactly. And that's the easiest way to kind of get into it. Like, okay, it's a reality. It's a simulation, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. There is still consequence. You will get stabbed. It will hurt. You'll bleed.
You will fall off the cliff.
You'll fall off a cliff. Like, it's just, these things are just as real as it gets.
You can't fly.
Yeah. No matter how much you want to say it's a degree of freedom soup, you can't fly.
Yeah. So I think that, I guess we're working toward the end of the episode. Yeah, we're trying to. Last time we felt it went a little long, so we're gonna probably.
I think that was one of the things that we learned from. Yeah, man, I wanted to talk about that at the beginning of the episodes, were the things that we learned from the process of the first one. I think overall the length of the podcast was a big thing. We needed to cut that, because we can go on and on about this stuff, man. You know how we do.
Oh yeah, all day. But the thing is like, we have to cut. It's kind of hard to actually have to cut ourselves off and put limits on it, because like we're trying to say, even in the second episode, we are just at the surface. Like we are, that this stuff goes so deep that we will be talking, like, if it were up to me, we would just spew all of it out in a 7-hour, 10-hour, 15-hour long podcast.
Nobody wants to listen to that, Shannon. but I'm really glad we got into talking about the consensus today, because for me, that is like a huge component of defining reality that I want people to hone in on is, information stored and consensus.
Plus consensus.
It's not the free for all for you to just make up stuff and go along. We call that hallucination.
So, but we do have some freedom, because, that's why, like I said, my job as a physicist is to go to the boundaries of what we know about reality and to create new structures, new configurations, new information that models reality, but high fidelity. Like I don't have the freedom as a scientist to just sit down in my room and just think about whatever I want to think about and then just start spewing it as fact. No, I have to make sure that all the math is correct. I have to make predictions with it. Even as a theorist, if I come up with something and it still has to be verified experimentally, like there's no free lunch.
There's no free, yep. There is no free lunch. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Yeah, there is no free lunch.
And as a physicist, it's like, to be able to conceptualize, to be able to have this job, I've spent years, like I've computed it. I've easily spent over 20,000 hours studying physics and mathematics. That's probably a conservative lower bound. Like
Dr. Ray in the house, by the way, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for like 15 some odd years, just studying nonstop. Yeah. But the thing is all of that studying was the act of creating these conceptual tools, which expands my boundary of thought. Yeah. Because sometimes when I talk to people, you can tell that they don't have the requisite conceptual tools to try to answer some of the questions that they're trying to ask. It's like you don't have the information necessary. Like, it's almost like the whole speculation thing we're talking about. And like, you get to this boundary of what you know, and then anything beyond that boundary, you're just left speculating, like what happens to us after we die. No one has access to that information, so everything we think about it is just going to be a speculation. Yeah. And so,
I think how I picture it in my head is, I imagine like you as a physicist, for example, being that silhouette of a man in the Degree of Freedom soup, and the more information the more knowledge you gain, the more information you access, is like you trying to expand how much of that freedom of information soup your shape can actually cover.
Does
that make sense?
I think just to modify it a little bit, it's like, imagine that within a Degree of Freedom soup, it's the resolution. It's like I'm dividing your body, like the amount, how you conceptualize what information you have access to. It depends on the number of configurations you can be in, the number of degrees of freedom you have access to. Like we're saying in computing in the last episode, if you have 1 bit, you can have up and down as your configurations. 2 bit, you have up, up, down, down, up, down, up, down. You have, and so the more bits you have, the more processing power you have, the more configurations you can be in, the more conceptual tools you have. So to me, it's more like, as I'm sitting here and I'm learning all these precision tools and all these different concepts, I'm dividing myself up more and more and more, and that gives me more. Basically, I'm improving my computational capacity, like my the number of configurations that can be placed in.
That's interesting though, because I think I'm thinking about it. And I'm wondering if, so what you're saying is that, because how I picture it in my head is, imagine you're making cookies. Mm-hmm. And you have your dough rolled out, and you get one of those cookie cutter shapes. You want to make a gingerbread man, for example.
Yeah.
Okay. And imagine that the sheet of cookie dough is the Degree of Freedom soup.
Okay.
And then you have the silhouette of a man, which is the cookie cutter of the gingerbread man.
Yeah.
You're going to have to put that shape of a gingerbread man in the Degree of Freedom soup, and then he takes up a certain shape in there.
Yeah, yeah.
I might be getting this all wrong, but bear with me here. So now you are this cookie cutter guy.
Yep.
You have that boundary of the shape and you are stuck in the degree of freedom soup. I feel like the more information you gather, for someone like you who's a physicist who's trying to like reach the outer bounds of, what we know and try to like explore more concepts, you are trying to get a bigger cookie cutter so that you can take up more of those boxes. So you can understand and access more of those boxes.
So this is actually I'm really glad you brought this up, because there are two ways to improve the number of configurations you have. Because what you're describing almost sounds like an increase in matter. Like I'm increasing the amount of matter I have. If I'm increasing the size of the cookie cutter shape or the silhouette, then I would be increasing the amount of matter. So I'm assuming that the amount of matter I have is fixed. And so because the amount of matter I have is fixed, the only way I can increase my computational capacity is to take that matter and to break it up into smaller and smaller pieces. And so this was actually one thing I wanted to bring up was, and maybe I'll just go into it. If it doesn't work out, we'll cut it. But so all right, everyone bear with me. We're doing another mind's eye conceptualization exercise. So imagine that you have a square.
Okay.
And so imagine that I can take this square and I can divide it up into 4 equal sized squares. Mm-hmm. Now look at the bottom left square. Both of these squares can be divided up into the same resolution, meaning that assume that I have these 2 sized squares and because they are squares, they can be chopped up to the same resolution. Like I'm just going to make a bunch of small squares out of these 2 squares. Now, the bigger square, the original square, because it has the same resolution, but it has more mass, it's going to have more configurations it can be placed in. Whereas the bottom square, even though it has the same resolution as the top square, it has a smaller mass, and so it inherently has less configurations to be placed in. And so if you're trying to improve computational capacity, there's 2 ways to do it. Increase the resolution and increase the mass. And so like I was saying, I was looking more at the former, which was as a human, I can't increase my mass.
Because I'm thinking like as a human, I'm thinking like that is like a mind. That gingerbread man shape is the human mind that is expandable. And you're just trying to like, get more into your mind and then access more of that space of information.
Yeah, but here's the thing. When you have a higher resolution, you divide it up into smaller pieces, you're increasing the dimension, and so there is an expansion, but it's an expansion that's happening in the conceptual space.
Yep.
Bam.
I see what you mean. All right. I like it. Yeah. We did definitely go over time, but it doesn't matter.
And this actually brings back to what you were saying before about conceptual keys. Like that's the whole point. And there are 2 ways to increase your computational capacity or your space of conceptualization that you have access to. It's through learning new languages and experience. Those 2 things seem to be the 2 things, and I don't think I'm missing anything, but increase the number of experiences you have. Of course, that's going to give you more tools to conceptualize, and increase the number of languages you have where, I don't know if we've defined language yet, but
yeah, language not like actual English or French or whatever.
Anything. Right. So if we break down language as just being a set of rules for packing and unpacking information,
yeah.
That's
so
it.
It could be language, it could be code, it could be, whatever it is that you have to learn in order to access new information.
Yes, exactly. And to be able to read and write, basically. So you can read information and you can write information. And so it's the point to where if you can read it, then whenever, like if someone's speaking to you in a language you don't understand, all that just gets dumped into your noise folder. So you have like a folder that's like, oh, that's just noise. It gets dumped into noise. That's indistinguishable from a jackhammer, going off in the background. So it all just goes into the noise bin.
That's not what we're doing right now, hopefully.
Well, I mean, I'm sure if there's someone who is who doesn't speak English, that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Apologize. So, but yeah. So I guess that's for a topic for our next episode.
Yeah.
Because this can keep going on forever, guys.
We're excited to talk about this stuff once again, guys.
All right, everybody. That's the end of the second episode. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with us once again. And to answer the question, are we in a simulation? The answer is obviously yes, but it isn't the simulation you think. It's not some simulation created by some advanced civilization. Instead, it is the simulation of hard reality by our human computers that is just sifting through it and creating our model for us. And so that's kind of how that's our
yeah.
answer
I mean, it might be that it is some advanced civilization and all that, but we don't know. There's really no way for us to verify that. There's no way for us to effectively gather that information. At least not right now, anyway. So.
And if it is true, we have to ask the question: does it really matter at the end of the day? Is there really anything that's any different?
And I don't think it makes much of a difference whether it's an advanced civilization or not, or we're still going to have to navigate this degree of freedom soup to create hard reality out of it. So what are we going to do?
And to leave you with this one last thought experiment: imagine that some civilization did create a simulation, and we're like the millionth iteration of civilization after civilization creating simulations, and at this point you can't even determine who started it at first anyway. Like, you don't know who started the first one. It's impossible to find that out. Then we really have to ask, does it really matter at the end of the day?
Yep, it doesn't. Now, if you agree or disagree, you think we're full of shit, please let us know. You can hit us up on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at The Bottom Total Podcast. You can expect new episodes every Monday on Apple Podcast and Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. Stay turtling,
my friends.
We'll catch you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Peace.